This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. My headcanon is that Nintendo know exactly what they're doing with Zelda games. And hey, evidently they do, if Tears of the Kingdom and all of its new records have anything to say about it, but I mean more in terms of some of the creepy content that ends up in these games. If the original Legend of Zelda was inspired by Miyamoto exploring the caves around his house when he was a child, I'm hoping that the rest of this franchise doesn't have parallels to Miyamoto's childhood because, oh my god, could you imagine? Zelda is quietly one of Nintendo's more disturbing franchises, and given that we've got close to 4 decades worth of material to work with, you can imagine how messed up it gets. I was playing Tears of the Kingdom with my head on a swivel for creepy moments because you know they're out there. They've always been out there. I think the easiest place to start is with a scare that initially had a big impact, but one that waned over time as the player base and each individual player became more experienced and world-weary, but to be fair, nothing really prepares you for your first Guardian. You know, other than the original trailer for Breath of the Wild where it's literally the focus of the action, but it's an enemy that is unlike anything that we've ever seen in a Zelda game before. One with a massive pool of health that can't be effectively chipped down by the meager selection of early game weapons, and has to be approached with a very different kind of strategy. It's a power imbalance that takes a long time to go away. With stronger weapons you can take a Guardian head on, and with better knowledge you can remove a Stalker's legs to anchor it in place and reflect its lasers back with your shield, but you only get this confidence after dozens of encounters with Guardians where they absolutely destroy you. When the only other obstacles are some bats and the occasional bokoblin, a mechanical octopus that can one-shot you with its laser eye is so much more of a problem, and indeed one that comes with a lot of fear. There's a reason why the central tower is so daunting to climb with all the Guardians watching it, and why the basement of LeMay Labyrinth Island is not somewhere where you'll want to hang around for long. It's the hurry-up that you didn't know that you needed. When I was 7, I nearly drowned. I was in a public pool with a bunch of other kids, and there was this big inflatable obstacle course with a high wall at the end, so you vault over it and into the water below. I did this, but didn't have time to move out of the way of a larger kid doing the same after me and landing directly on my head. Not sure if I was knocked out or just stunned, but the next clear memory I have is desperately clinging onto some poor girl's hair with both of us screaming. I'm only sharing this because do you know what else happened when I was 7? The Wind Waker came out. And hey, that's a pretty awesome game, all things considered, but it also had a lot of water in it. And my childhood trauma that was very fresh in 2002 took a hefty hit when I first came across a big octo. I was never too scared of the vast ocean in Wind Waker because you have a lot of control over your boat, but when a big octo traps you in its whirlpool that slowly pulls you in, yeah, I don't like it. It didn't help that I found a big octo while exploring the Great Sea very early on in Wind Waker, before I'd been to the Forest Haven for the boomerang, and I tell ya, the dread you feel when no item you have can touch this thing as it slowly eats you, it's not my preferred way to go. This doesn't make for good therapy. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently when it dawned on me that Ganon sure does die in some graphic ways in this franchise. The conversation was about Zelda, by the way, as if he's talking about how he moved house recently and I'm like, Ganon gets stabbed in the head a lot, doesn't he? Anyway, yeah, Ganon bites the dust in some pretty gory ways. Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, he gets a sword to the head. Twilight Princess, he dies standing up with a sword through his middle. And I haven't got that far in Tears of the Kingdom, but I'm presuming that Link belly-to-back suplexes Ganon off the edge of Hyrule Castle and into one of those giant jam buttholes. But actually, Twilight Princess Ganon doesn't die from being stabbed. He dies from something a lot more unexplained. So Twilight Princess isn't actually Ganon's game, but because my guy is a warlock who punches above his weight, he muscles in on Zant's spotlight and takes over as the primary antagonist. Zant was just to warm up the crowd for Big G to see us home, but with Ganon coming in so late in the game, it's hard to shake Zant's lingering presence. I say that, but when you're knee-deep in Ganon's 4-stage final boss fight, you do forget about poor old Zant a tad. As if Twilight Princess reverting to type is just there to highlight how quickly we can forget about antagonists. However, Zant ends up having the final word, since while skewering Ganon with a weapon designed to kill him in an already existing wound somehow isn't enough to end him, Zant breaking his own neck is? Right, listen, there's 1,001 theories that you could attach to this since it's never been properly explained, but Zant snapping his own neck for whatever reason is enough to immediately kill Ganondorf, which is both very wild and a little terrifying to watch given Zant's blank expression and the audible crack of the neck snap. Zelda generally stays away from body horror, but this is some horrifying body movements. I didn't need another sleep paralysis demon, thank you! Hey guys, real quick, my channel has been approved for YouTube memberships now, so if you fancy supporting my channel more directly, you can become a member for as little as £1 a month and gain access to some nifty perks, as well as being featured on my channel page. Hit the join button below this video if that sounds cool to you. Thank you, and let's get back to the video. I've been playing Tears of Kingdom a lot, and do you know what I've spent most of my time doing? Dying. Yeah, it's not a really hard game or anything, but it's got enough new systems and enemies in it that it does take a little while to adapt to. The game over screen, incidentally, is pretty short and does its job of telling you that you suck, but can try again straight away, which is generally the case for every game over in all the Zelda games. The exception may be familiar to anyone who has wound down the clock in Majora's Mask, either because they couldn't remember the notes to the Song of Time, or intentionally out of morbid curiosity, because with all of the focus on the moon getting closer, surely it's not just a simple game over screen, right? I mean, yeah, but I don't think anyone was ever truly prepared for what the end of the world looks like in Majora's Mask. The moon's on fire and crashes through the clock tower like it's made of paper before the flames engulf Clock Town completely and spread out to every corner of Termina. Link is left in some shadowy location away from the mayhem before he too is consumed by fire. All that's left is the echo of the happy mask salesman asking Link if he's met a terrible fate. If there was ever any ambiguity with this game over, which I gotta say, I feel like there's not, the 3DS remake confirms for you that the moon falling did indeed destroy the world and everyone who lives there. Like, imagine if dying in Tears of the Kingdom saw Hyrule overrun with monsters and Zelda dying. It's some real Return of Ganon shit, I tell ya. Do you know the first rule of online gaming? It's that gamers never look up. If you hide somewhere above them or just take the high ground in general, they're gonna have a hard time noticing you. It's this philosophy that strikes at the heart of what makes Wall Masters so pants-shittingly terrifying, because up until Ocarina of Time's Forest Temple, where you meet them for the first time, you've been playing a game that almost exclusively operates at ground level. Apart from a few puzzles and a couple of dungeon layouts, you rarely have to look up, and in fact, the trick with Wall Masters isn't so much about looking up, it's being aware enough of your surroundings to notice when one's coming for you. They do enough to make their presence known. There's a noticeable audio cue that comes of your shadow increasing to a suspiciously circle-shaped shadow, and these are the clues that make Wall Masters fair and balanced. In real life, they probably wouldn't telegraph their attacks so much, but here you've just got to have your wits about you, and you'll be fine. But if you're distracted for any reason, and Ocarina of Time is a fairly distracting game at most points, it's the closest thing that this franchise has to a jump scare. The Forest Temple is infamous in part because of its creepy atmosphere, but it's also where these guys come in, and they stick around for Majora's Mask 2 to the same effect. All you gotta do is pay attention. There's some sweet irony in how the most cartoony Zelda game ever made is also home to some of the worst horrors that this franchise has ever seen. It's like the perfect way to set up horror, really. Wind Waker's got an adorable protagonist living in this picture book world full of colour and larger-than-life characters with over-exaggerated features, and just as you're starting to feel nice and comfortable, wham! Here's a Re-Dead screaming in your face. Can't imagine why though. Is he hurt? Do I need to call someone? I might just call someone anyway just to make myself feel better. So Re-Deads and their mummified counterparts, the Gibdos, are in general a pretty intense enemy by Zelda standards. They're zombies that shuffle towards you with glacial urgency, but once they catch up to you, they'll grab on and hump the health right out of you. The way they catch up is by paralyzing Link with a high-pitched scream, and it's a balancing act to be close enough to damage the Re-Deads while being far enough away that you don't get screamed at. Wind Waker's Re-Deads are a step above though, benefiting immensely from the cartoony style that gives them a gaping mouth and piercing red eyes, which, when screaming, has a profound effect on how they work in this game. They're weak to light, so you've got a few ways of killing them, but it's not the danger they pose that's the problem, it's the screaming and the eyes. They'll never leave you. The Silent Realm has absolutely no business being in a Zelda game. It's a simple enough concept as a trial from the gods to test Link's dedication to the cause, but the Silent Realms pop the fuck off for no reason whatsoever. It's actually a perfect microcosm of what makes for good horror, an eerie atmosphere that feels almost artificially calm that's just waiting for any excuse to unleash every ounce of the horrors that are bubbling away just under the surface. You know, Link's had trials before, he actually had a few in Skyward Sword, but I would like to know why this one is so aggressive, I suppose. The Silent Trials have Link roaming around a quieter version of the 4 main areas in the game, with the usual enemies and hazards traded out for alternatives that fit the theme of sneaking around without being seen. There are 15 sacred tears to find, which remind me a lot of the Twilight bugs in Twilight Princess, but you're on a time limit here, with this flower off to the side slowly wilting away to let you know that you can't hang around. If you're seen by the Watchers, or end up in the funky coloured water, or if you just run out of time, every enemy in the area, helpfully called Guardians, I'm seeing a pattern here, Nintendo, they all wake up at the same time and make a beeline straight for your location. Some of them run ominously at you, and some of them fly straight towards your candy ass, and it stays this way until you pick up another sacred tear. This is a lot, and the shift from still calmness to all-out panic is one that still shakes me to my core. The music that plays when you're being chased is like anxiety in a WAV file. It's like a nightmare come to life. The Guardians falling away when it comes to their fear factor could possibly be applied to every part of this video. Therefore, you can take anything to do with Tears of the Kingdom with a pinch of salt, as the game has been out for just over a week, so I do need to be careful what I talk about, but also, how do you know if something's scary if you haven't given it adequate time to marinate in your mind yet? I'll tell you how. It's because I was minding my own business exploring these new but familiar plains of Hyrule when these fucking evil hands popped out from a random patch of gloom on the floor. I don't need time to work out if this is scary or not. The Gloom Hands are so effective at what they're trying to do. It's a similar idea to the Wall Masters that takes advantage of lapses in concentration and not giving the right amount of respect to the dangers lying dormant in your environment, but whereas the Wall Masters had one quick movement that was easy to avoid, the Gloom Hands are way more relentless. They rise out of seemingly unimportant puddles of red gloom, and they'll chase you down with incredible speed, bringing big damage and a portable patch of gloom to really ram home how screwed you are. They act unlike any hand enemy that Zelda's had before, and have mobility that reminds me an awful lot of the Guardians. At least Guardians had obvious weak spots and a fairly basic way of defeating them. The Gloom Hands are a lot more unpredictable and harder to pin down. There's a reason why going underground is a bit of a crapshoot in Tears of the Kingdom. You never quite know what you'll run into. Generally speaking, the stories in these games never go too wild. They'll talk of violent insurrections and many people dying, but to keep things family friendly, Zelda games generally steer away from anything too over the top. The one big exception comes midway through Twilight Princess, where the light spirit in Lanayru attempts to explain what makes the fused shadow so dangerous, and brain blasts a vision into Link's head of just how corrupting power lust can be. Usually, this is the sort of message that will be delivered via a line of dialogue, but Twilight Princess goes for the show don't tell approach to memorable effect. Honestly, and I mean this with 100% deepest sincerity, what the fuck? I'm not sure if this game had a quota that had to be filled in pursuit of being a dark, edgy Zelda game for a slightly older audience, but this chunk of exposition is delivered in such an over-the-top way that it can be far too easy to ignore what the light spirit is saying. There's a lot happening here, and in trying to tell a story of how the first citizens of Hyrule turned on each other so that they could reach the Sacred Realm and take that juicy Triforce, we get highlights such as Link and Ilia's blank eyes, Link killing Ilia before she kills him, Dark Link Thanos snapping regular Link out of existence and then becoming Link, and a bit of whatever you want to call this. It's effective storytelling because it's a dramatic tonal shift for a game that was already pretty dark with its subject matter, but again, the shift is so big that it's honestly a little distracting. I mean, you won't forget about it in a hurry, and I think that's what they were going for. Everything that I've talked about up until this point is relatively justifiable. You can understand the creative process that led up to something disturbing ending up in a franchise not exactly famous for its creepy content, even if the content itself is questionable at best. With that in mind, the only way to end this video is to open the floor really to anyone who wants to have a go at explaining what and why Dead Hand is the way it is. It actually fascinates me to an uncomfortable degree, since on the surface, Dead Hand seems like a simple creature design for the end of a disturbing dungeon. You head on into Kakariko's well to see what happened to the water, and hey look, it's a thing with too many hands and no legs and really bad posture that wants to eat you. Dead Hand is so unexplainable. The more you think about it, the less it makes sense, since it's designed with none of the charm of previous enemies and bosses in Ocarina of Time, and instead marks a transition into the latter, more mature section of the game. What I struggle with is understanding what Dead Hand was inspired by. Clearly there's an influence from some of the weirder parts of Japanese horror, but Dead Hand is never actually elaborated on either in-game or in any extended media. It's just this deeply disturbing entity that is slightly human-like given that it has a face, but everything else about it is almost Lovecraftian in nature. Deliberately unlike anything you've ever seen in a Zelda game to really underline how fucked up this part of the game is. You're at the bottom of a well that kind of doubles as a torture chamber, and you found this blob with all the hands around the edge of the room that seem to be attached, but you don't really know how. It's so far removed from the dragons and giant spiders you've been fighting before, and you can't really account for it. And since Dead Hand's a mini-boss, he just turns up again in the Shadow Temple for good measure. Good to know that there's either multiple Dead Hands or that he can't be killed properly. Not sure which one's worse, really. And yeah, those are the most disturbing things that I can find in the Zelda games. Do you agree, or is there something even worse that I've forgotten? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. If you need something else to watch right now, I talked about the hardest Zelda challenges last week, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Scott Riker, and Sarah Mallion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.